How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Square Repair. I am your host, Jovani Dante Griego, and in today's episode, I'm going to show you guys everything you need to know about wiring up an LS swap in a square body. The square body Chevy, the iconic, hard-working truck from the 70s and 80s. These trucks were built to endure the toughest jobs America had to throw at them. This is the show where we take these beasts that were once the heartbeat of America and bring new life into them to last for decades to come. My name is Jovani Dante Griego, and this is Square Repair. Now behind me, as you guys know, this is our 1987 square body Suburban. This thing we went ahead and dropped a 5.3 into, or a 4.8, I can't remember. It's backed by an SM465 manual transmission. Whatever came in this truck, we just basically bolted up an LS to it. Now, a lot of people new to doing LS swaps, or if this is your first swap, the wiring is probably hands down the thing that you're probably worried the most about. And what I'm gonna try to do in this video is alleviate a lot of that stress, a lot of that worry, by showing you guys basically everything you need to know. Now, back in the day when LS swaps were first becoming prominent, you only had a couple options for like a budget wiring harness. You could take an old wiring harness that came with your engine, basically the OEM harness, kind of chop it all up, add some wires, add some positives and negatives, and kind of make everything work that way with the stock ECU. Now today we have tons of options. There's companies like LSX Specialties that will basically custom design you a harness to go into whatever you're swapping into. Poly Terminator systems, there's even Summit Racing has their own wiring harnesses now. But what we're gonna be talking about today is just standalone harnesses. That means we're basically going to use an OEM style harness that's been converted to standalone, and that's gonna be able to run just the ECU and the engine by itself basically, and a transmission if you're running an automatic. What we're running in here is we're running a 4.8, obviously a Gen 3. So it's gonna be a 24X system. And then we're running the 0411 ECU as well. Now the 0411 ECU can be found in basically any engine from about 99 to about 2002. There's a bunch of variances in there. Some of them came in later trucks like vans. All you need to know is that this is the red and blue ECU. Anything later on is gonna be green and blue. Now, like I said, one of the things you could do is just use that OEM harness, chop it all down and make your own standalone harness. That would be probably the bare cheapest you can go. But thanks to companies sending their schematics overseas to China and other countries like that, those companies have now basically stolen their patents, stolen their schematics, and are producing these harnesses for dirt cheap. Now, I'm not gonna get into the morals of that or anything like that. All I have to say is that if you're a company that's sending your designs and products out for the cheapest dirt cheap labor, then if you get your plans stolen, that's kind of on you, right? Could have kept it all in America, but you didn't. So no pity for the weak. You can now hop on Amazon or eBay or your favorite sketchy website and basically purchase an entire standalone harness for about $100. The cheapest variants are going to be the LS1 style with the 4L60E. That's what we've gone ahead and purchased today, and that's what's actually installed on this Suburban. Let me bring you guys in for a closer look to just show you how it's laid out on the engine, and then I'll kind of go over some specific details on how to hook it up to the factory wiring on the vehicle. All right, now obviously you're gonna have to mind the camera angles a little bit and stuff. I'll try my best to show you guys everything. If you look down here, we have our ECU. It's just kind of tossed there. We have the fuse block and everything that came with this harness. All of this stuff is not necessarily important to know where it's at, kind of just like my trial run here. But what this is a good example of is that you don't need to have everything like perfectly wired and perfect in order for these to work. These China harnesses, you can basically just plug everything in to where it needs to go, and they just kind of work. You don't really even need to understand the fundamentals of wiring to kind of figure this out, which is why I'm not going to go into detail on like every single plug and where it needs to go. I'm going to more just talk about things you might run into and little tricks here and there to get this thing working. So if we look in the corner there, I'm going to try to zoom in on it. You'll see that plug straight ahead. What that is our factory fuse block plug. That is the firewall plug that goes straight to the back of the fuse block that has all the engine, whatever engine was in here before. Mine was a 350 TBI, but basically anything that hooked up to the engine. Now, that's important for a couple reasons. One is that we need a ignition switched positive. That means when the engine is cranking, we need the ECU to have 12 volts. Another thing is there's a couple other extra kind of, I'll call them auxiliary wires there. There's an oil temp wire, there's a coolant temp wire, and there's a couple other things that I'll show you guys in this schematic here. Now, keeping that schematic in mind, what do we really need to run this ECU? Well, The ECU gets its positive power from the wiring harness. This Chinese wiring harness gets its power by connecting it straight to the starter, which I'll show you guys in a few. So really, we only need to give it switched power at this point. It has its own dedicated 12-volt lines. We got some grounds here. There's a ground that gets hooked up close to the ECU, and then there's a ground that gets hooked up behind the head. Realistically, we only have to feed this thing a 12-volt ignition signal. Well, if you look at my schematic again, you'll see that there is, in fact, where the old distributor or HEI, or you can see mine kind of goes down, and then I have it plugged into, I don't really know. I mean, this is all kind of jumbled up here. I like to put these just kind of quick spade terminals for now for testing, but you can see mine is hooked up to this spade terminal, and then that's running to the power that needs to go to our fuse block. Now, mind you, I've made a couple modifications on mine. So mine's not going to be exactly like the stock one, but basically you're going to have a wire on your harness that's labeled 12 volt switched or 12 volt ignition or something like that. That's where you're going to hook up that wire to. Now you can go as far as to remove the whole fuse block, depin things that you don't need. What I end up doing most of the time is usually just cutting that ignition wire, extending it out if it's not long enough, and then hooking it up straight to the ECU. This is going to be a down and dirty, just get the engine running kind of thing. Obviously, once you know what needs to be connected where, that's when you're going to go ahead and clean everything up, which is like the stage I'm at now. You know, I got these bundles of wires everywhere. I know now, because this engine runs, what needs to be connected, what doesn't, what can get kind of tucked away, what can get depinned, whatever. It just depends on how clean you want to make your engine bay. Right now, I'm not too worried about it. I'll probably mount up the ECU somewhere so it doesn't fall over. But as of right now, this engine starts and runs. I won't be able to show you guys that now because I tore into another project basically, and all my battery connections and stuff are disconnected. Okay, so I'm gonna crawl underneath the engine for you guys. And again, this video is not going to be like a slideshow of me showing you every single plug you need to plug in on these harnesses. I think you guys will be able to figure out very quickly where everything needs to go. But one of the things that you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to get power to that harness. You can see here, this is our starter. I dropped it down so you guys can see it better. But the starter, obviously, it has those two positive wires. Those, you just hook up to the positive post of your starter. The same one that's shared with that big battery cable that goes up to the top of the battery. Now, another question I get constantly asked is, how does the starter get its signal to start? You don't got to worry about that, because if your vehicle has the vehicle harness on it, it already has this starter signal. On a GM vehicle, it's usually a purple wire. I have no idea what color this is anymore. I think I extended it out. On a GM vehicle, it's always going to be a purple wire that goes to the little post on the starter. So again, this is the LS starter, right? We're wiring it up basically the same way that the small block Chevy or whatever engine was in here was wired before. You have your positive lug going to the battery. Now we've added our two wiring harness leads for positive, and then we have our purple starter wire. But you can see that just goes to the little terminal on the LS starter. That should all be down here. You know, if you guys have your engine out and you have the stock harness on the vehicle, this should all just be sitting down here ready for you to basically bolt on. Now, a couple other things in this area, in this region, you might be able to see right there. That's our crank sensor. So that one just gets plugged down here too. There's a harness that kind of routes this way. You might be able to see up there, but there's some oxygen sensor plugs and stuff that get plugged in on this right side of the engine. So another thing that I'd like to point out, and I've gotten questions on it before or comments on other videos, because I have done a video on this in the past with these China harnesses. Some people have issues because these harnesses aren't like stock. They're a little bit longer. Some things can get stretched or put in the wrong spot. But when you're doing this, all you have to really remember is that your coolant temp sensor on a stock 5.3 or 4.8 or whatever you're working on will be right there, driver's side of the head. Your alternator, driver's side of the head. Same harness that has the alternator plug and the coolant temp sensor plug has your throttle body connectors, the IAT, throttle body connectors, and all this other stuff that gets put up here. And then in that same harness, you'll have, this is your MAF sensor and your intake air temp sensor, which we'll get to in just a little bit here. My main rationale for explaining all of this to you guys is that if you notice, that same harness right there also has all the driver's side coil pack harness and injector harnesses. Now, I don't know how, but in some instances, I've had people plug this side in on this side and then this side in on this side. Now, what's going to happen is instead of telling the injector 1 to fire, you're firing it for injector 2. And so basically your engine in some way is 180 degrees out. Sometimes I've seen them run, but they run like crap. Other times they just don't start at all. They'll backfire, whatever. That's why. Just make sure that the side with all the accessories is on the driver's side. Side with, this one's more bare than this one. This one has a bunch of connectors. This one doesn't have as many. Now, another gotcha is obviously check to make sure, and actually it's on this side, always make sure that you have that grounded to the back of the head. Also make sure it's a clean metal surface. I know a lot of people paint their heads and whatnot. I think these ones might even be painted. If you're going to paint your heads, just make sure you leave a little spot that you can have a nice ground for that ground back there. Next area is, like I said, there is a ground here. You can see I'm just testing here. You can ground this really anywhere, but I have mine gone to the core support ground. This one is shared with like the headlights and whatnot. Basically on this side, you just want a good ground. So the next area I'd like to address with you guys is the fuel pump. The fuel pump, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's not as complicated as you would think. It's actually very easy on a truck like this that came with a in-tank fuel pump. Now, in the last video, I showed you guys the fuel pump setup that we did on this. We're using all stock factory components and we're using an in-tank pump. If we take a look at this fuse block here, you can see we obviously have our fuses and whatnot. Then we have a couple relays. One of these relays is just dedicated to turning off and on the ECU. That one we don't really mess with. On the back of this, you'll notice on mine, for example, I do have this green wire. That green wire, if we were to trace this all the way back around the harness and whatnot, you'll find that green wire actually controls the fuel pump. There'll be a wire labeled in your harness that says fuel pump. That you do not connect straight to your fuel pump though. That wire is the signal wire for the ECU to turn off or on the fuel pump. The way that these ECUs work, and a lot of these functions work, is that it's a ground triggered relay. So that means the ECU is gonna send out ground signal in order to turn on whatever you're trying to use. That fuel pump wire, and I think this is it here, or this might, yeah. This is the fans. This is a good example though. So there's this green wire here. This comes from the harness. And this one is labeled fan, I think, on the harness. This fan wire I'm using on this relay here, this is going to be the ground side of this relay. Now you can see I have my positive here and I have my other switch signals. But basically what this is going to do is this is going to, when the ECU is requesting fans, it's going to send a ground signal to this wire, and that's going to click on this relay and then power up my fans. The fuel pump works in the same exact way. That wire that's labeled fuel pump, that's wired to the relay. That's going to turn the relay on when it's requesting fuel pump, which is going to be obviously all the time as soon as you turn the key. What does that mean? What does any of this mean? Now, the main thing to note here is that these are ground activated relay signals. I'm going to put a diagram here. The same way the fans turn on is the same way the fuel pump works. You're going to activate the ground side of the relay with it. Everything else has constant 12-volt power, except for the one that's feeding the actual device, which in this case is this one. You can see this is going down to my fan. This doesn't have power, but all these have power. Once this ground gets grounded by the ECU, then this has power. That's about as simply as I could put it. I know it's really hard to describe these things if you've never done this before, but that's really all you need to know, is that the ECU only controls grounds. It doesn't send positive voltage. It doesn't send anything else. It just sends a ground signal. That signal isn't strong enough to be an actual ground. Like, you can't just hook up your fuel pump to 12-volt positive and then have the ECU turn on the ground side. It will short out, or it's not enough amperage. So you have to use a relay to amplify that across the board, so that way it will turn on when you need it to. One of the other kind of spots that hung me up a little bit is the MAF sensor and IAT intake air temp sensor. The reason why is because on the LS1, the original LS1, these are two separate components. Pretty much on everything else, even Vortec trucks and whatnot from the same era, these all became one kind of unit. They ended up putting the IAT inside the MAF sensor, so it reads both intake air temp and MAF signal. That would be the preferred way to go, but this harness only comes with both. Now you have options. You could depin everything and pin it up to a 5-pin, or they even sell adapter harnesses that take your 3-pin and your 2-pin IAT and branch them into the 5-pin. It really just depends on what MAF you're going to use. I had this MAF laying around, and there's a part number list on the actual standalone harness PDF that I have on my website for the standalone harnesses. It tells you exactly what part numbers you need for, you know, the MAF sensor, your oxygen sensors, all that stuff. If you guys don't have any actual hardware, it tells you what part numbers you should get that will work with this. But what I ended up doing, and what I've been doing in the past, is I like to use these super cheap. This is off of a, I think, 1999 Chevy Silverado. This is like a $40 air intake off of eBay. And what I do is I modify this. I cut it down a little bit. You can see I kind of bend the brackets to where they'll kind of go where they need to go, like that. And I can cut this down a little bit more if I needed to. But what this does is this allows my MAF to connect to my intake, and then this gives me enough pipe to where I can thread in very crudely an intake air temp sensor. I use a Christmas tree drill bit to drill just undersize, and then I just kind of tighten that up with a wrench until it threads into there. Pretty much, it's basically self-tapping. I go and buy the intake air temp sensor that I'm supposed to, and then I get the MAF that I'm supposed to, and they each have their own circuit, and it's all cherry and it's all good. All right, now look, honestly, I've tried making this video a bunch of times in the past, and the reason why it's so hard is just that there's obviously so many components to these harnesses, and for the people that have never done this before or have no clue really and this is their first swap, this is all more of an advanced level. Now, it's still very easy to just plug and play things like this, but understanding the actual electronic components and understanding, you know, how a relay works, for example, are things that I can't really teach someone because I'm not an electrical engineer. I wouldn't even call myself like an automotive electrical expert. All I can really tell you guys is if you get hung up on a certain part, just Google it. Google fuel pump relay, and it'll give you kind of pinouts. The relays all have numbers on them. It'll tell you exactly what number does what on a relay. I've already showed you guys diagrams and whatnot. You can even go watch my cooling fan video. That kind of walks you through how to do it as well. Same principle for both the cooling fans and the fuel pump. The reason why I'm sitting in front of this kind of mess is that this was actually the first harness I bought for this vehicle. And since we've kind of changed directions a little bit on what I'm doing with this vehicle, I've kind of cut this thing down so many times that I figured it would just be easier to buy a new harness. And what I'm getting at with that is just try out the $90, $95 harness. See if it fits, see if it works, see if what you need. Use that one as kind of a guide. Cut down wires that you don't need, figure out what you do and don't need. And then if you mess something up, throw another $90 and just get a new one. And like I have in there, I have everything still kind of stock. Make sure the engine works, make sure it runs, and then worry about removing wires after the fact. For example, in this vehicle, we had a SM465 transmission in there. This thing came with the 4L60E plug. On this particular harness, I ended up depinning it. That turned into kind of an issue because there's ground wires going to the thing, and if you don't know or don't have the whole entire schematic of what needs to happen, I'd recommend just getting that transmission harness, wrapping it up, shoving it behind the engine or something. If you're trying to make this super clean, try to find a manual harness. There's a million ways to go with this. What I'm showing you guys is basically the down and dirty, cheap way to do this. The only cheaper way to go about this would be to do your own harness, but that's a whole bunch of work. I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of time to save a whole bunch of money. However, a little compromise is good too. I've easily spent 8 hours on a stock harness converting it to standalone. I don't think you need to do that. This is perfectly fine. These Chinese harnesses, they just work. I've seen a few bad apples. I've seen a few where like the grounds aren't properly connected and stuff like that. But like I said, return it, get another one, but try a different name on Amazon or whatever. They're all coming from the same place. They're all coming from the same factory. So if you have one that doesn't work, it's probably just defective, and just try another one. And if you don't want to go this route, you can also just spend a couple more $100 and get something that is pretty much guaranteed to work. Summit Racing, PSI harnesses. One of my personal favorites is LSX Specialties. Those guys do amazing work. They actually made me a custom harness for one of my other projects, and that thing is so beautiful, so nice. Obviously, you're gonna pay a little bit more premium for that, but they will make you basically whatever you need. You tell them you have a 4.8 with the 6L80E in the back, they know exactly what that's gonna take. They'll even send you an ECU that's compatible with it as well. Now, one more thing I want to make very clear is that the wiring is only one half of this process. Grab your wiring harness, plug everything in that you see fit, and you will crank the engine, and that thing probably will fire for about 2 seconds. And that's because the ECU still needs VATS removed. And that's super critical to getting this thing to work. VATS is the Vehicle Anti-Theft System. What happens is the stock ECU doesn't see the things that it used to see, right? You ripped it all out of the original truck that is in. But that truck had a body control module, it might have had a transmission control module, it might have had a fuel pump module. You've ripped all that away from it, and it's still trying to communicate with those modules. When it doesn't see those modules, it goes into VATS mode, and it basically locks the engine down. And what will happen is you will basically start the thing, it will fire for about exactly 2 seconds, and then shut off. You'll think, oh, it's probably a fueling issue. You'll grab a can of starting fluid, spray it into the intake, you'll start the engine. That thing will run as long as you're spraying starting fluid in the engine. It might run like crap, but it'll still run. But as soon as you let go of the starting fluid, it's gonna die. And that's because the injectors are off. The injectors aren't firing anymore. You're not gonna have fuel. How do you fix that? Well, you get VATS turned off. I'm not really gonna show you guys how to turn VATS off. There's a ton of other videos, the driveway engineer. Just type in VATS disable, you'll find a video on it, I promise you. There's free ways to do it using things like LS Droid, PCM Hammer. There's paid ways to do it like HP tuners, or there's even vendors that people on eBay that you can send your ECM to and they'll program it off, whatever else you need, and then send it back. Or you could just buy an ECU off of eBay that already has the things you need turned off on it. What I really recommend though is that you guys find a local tuner or a remote tuner, someone that you can at least go back to more than once, because what's gonna happen is once you get VATS disabled, you might need to disable the rear O2s. You might need to do something else later on, and having the ability to do that without having to buy a whole new ECU or do this over and over again is really gonna pay off in the long run. Now again, I know this video isn't gonna be perfect. It's never turns out into the video that I want it to be, just because I feel like I'm just shotgunning things out to you guys, and it's a lot to comprehend. Again, all I could say is buy one of these puppies, slap it on your engine, and just see what works and what doesn't. The comment section is a great resource to figure out problems. I've helped hundreds of people in the past. Other people have helped other people in my comment section. You can follow me on Instagram as well. We'll do my best to get back to you in the messages there as well, Facebook, all that stuff as well. But really, the one thing that gave me the most knowledge and got me to where I am now is just doing your own research. It's nice to be able to get information spoon-fed to you, when you're in a pinch or whatever, but understanding the actual principles and understanding the concepts of why is a lot of times more important than the what's or the how's. Once you understand the whys, the hows will just come naturally to you. I can tell you guys, 5 years ago, I didn't know what the hell I was doing when it came to relays. Now I can basically grab a relay from O'Reilly's, a spool of wire, and have whatever I need working in less than half an hour. And now the one last thing I will leave you guys with is that because I haven't uploaded in quite a while, I've been spending a lot of time trying to make this series, this square repair series. YouTube basically has punished me by not really showing you guys my videos anymore. Not really showing the people that like to see my videos anymore. So my one last ask for you guys, in order for me to keep creating content like this and keep creating the videos that I like to make and the videos that you guys like to see, I'm gonna need you guys to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and then hit the bell that's right next to the subscribe button. That will show you every time I upload a video, and that will give you guys a notification of when I do upload those videos. Also, if you guys want to, just leave a comment down below. That also helps me, more people see it. Share it on Facebook, whatever you need to do. Other than that, that's it. Once again, this is Square Repair. I'm your host, Jovani Dante Griego, and I will see you guys in the next episode.